My son-in-law's mother called my daughter a liability, said she came from nothing, said her bloodline wasn't fit to carry the Hargrove name. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told my daughter to get in the car. What that woman didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been watching the Hargroves for 3 years, and everything they thought they owned, I held the deed to. I saw them from across Piedmont Park. My daughter was sitting on the grass near the fountain with my 2 grandchildren, and 4 bags piled beside her like someone had packed in a hurry, because someone had. My grandson was 6, my granddaughter was 4. The little one was eating a cracker and watching the ducks. The older one sat very still with his arms around his knees, the way children do when they understand something is wrong but don't have words for it yet. I told my driver to pull over. He didn't ask why. He never does. I walked across the grass in my heels and I did not rush. I have not rushed since I was 32 years old and learned that panic is a luxury you cannot afford when people are depending on you. But my chest was doing something I hadn't felt in years. Something tight and low. My daughter looked up when she heard my footsteps. Her eyes were swollen. She'd been crying long enough that she was past the stage of tears, just that hollowed-out stillness that comes after. "Mom," that was all she said. I crouched down to my grandchildren first. I smoothed my granddaughter's hair back from her face, and she held out the last half of her cracker to me like it was the most important thing she could offer. I took it and ate it, and told her it was delicious. My grandson looked at me with his father's eyes and said, "Grandma, Mama said we're going on a trip." I said, "That's right, sweetheart. A long one." Then I stood and looked at my daughter. "What happened?" She pressed her lips together. She got me fired. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She told my husband I was stealing from the firm. She showed him documents, messages she said were mine. He believed her. He chose her over me, Mama. He looked me in the eyes and told me to leave. My granddaughter tugged my sleeve. "Are we going to Grandma's house?" "Yes, baby. We are going to Grandma's house." I had my driver load the bags. My daughter didn't speak on the ride to Buckhead. My grandson fell asleep against the window. My granddaughter held my hand the entire 40 minutes and asked me 3 times if the ducks at the park had names. I told her every single duck had a name, and we would look them all up when we got home. When we pulled through my gate, my daughter looked at the house the way she always had as a child, like it was the safest place on earth. I had built that house from nothing, raised her in it alone after her father left when she was 3 years old. 31 years ago, I was a paralegal with a studio apartment and a daughter who slept in a dresser drawer because I couldn't afford a crib. I had built everything she was looking at, piece by piece, decision by decision, through 28 years of work that nobody handed me. I showed my grandchildren to the room with the bunk beds I had bought the previous Christmas for exactly this kind of visit. My daughter ran a shower. I waited until I heard the water start. Then I walked to my study and made a call. My attorney answered on the second ring. "Margaret," I said, "I need you at my house tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. Bring everything we have on Hargrove Realty Group." I heard her pause. "Is this what I think it is?" "It is." "Then I'll be there at 6:30. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window looking out over my backyard. The patio lights were on. The hydrangeas my daughter had helped me plant the summer before were in full bloom. I had spent 3 years being patient, 3 years letting my son-in-law's mother believe she was the most powerful woman in the room. 3 years watching, waiting, documenting. My son-in-law's mother ran Hargrove Realty Group, the largest independent real estate firm in Atlanta's Buckhead corridor. She had built it over 20 years into something formidable, or so she believed. What she did not know, what she had never thought to investigate, was that the building her firm operated from, the 11-story glass tower on Peachtree Road that her name was effectively synonymous with, belonged to a holding company called Meridian Property Trust. Meridian Property Trust belonged to me. I had purchased the building in 2018 through 3 layers of LLC structure. I had done it because I had done my homework. I had done my homework because when my daughter came to me glowing and telling me she was engaged to a man named Preston Hargrove, I smiled and told her I was happy for her. Then I went home and spent 2 weeks learning everything there was to know about the family she was marrying into. What I found was not criminal. Not yet. But it was enough to tell me I needed to be positioned. Margaret arrived at 6:28. She sat across from me at my kitchen table while my grandchildren ate cereal in the next room and my daughter slept upstairs. "Tell me what they did," she said. I slid a folder across the table. My son-in-law's mother had spent 3 months building a case against my daughter inside the firm. My daughter had been brought on as a junior associate 2 years ago, a position my son-in-law had convinced her was an opportunity. What he had not told her, what neither of them told her, was that from the first day she walked through those doors, her mother-in-law had been cataloging every minor error, every late email, every imperfect report into a file she could use. The documents she showed my son-in-law were real. The context had been stripped out, altered, reframed, legitimate client communications made to look like theft, internal memos edited with my daughter's name inserted where they shouldn't have been. A forensic document examiner would see it in 30 minutes. Margaret turned the last page and looked up. "How long have you had this?" "6 weeks. She blinked. "You've had this for 6 weeks, and you waited?" "I needed them to move first," I said. "I needed everything they were going to do to be done. I wasn't going to disrupt a marriage on suspicion. I was going to respond to action with consequence." Margaret looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened her legal pad. "All right, walk me through what you want." By the time my daughter came downstairs at 9 o'clock, Margaret had 3 pages of notes and a plan that would take 8 days to execute. My daughter stood in the kitchen doorway in my robe and looked at the two of us. "What is all this?" I poured her coffee and set it on the counter. "Sit down, sweetheart. We have work to do." She sat. She listened. Halfway through, she started crying again, not from sadness this time, from anger, which is a different thing entirely. Anger has a spine to it. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I knew the documents didn't look right. But Preston said his mother had no reason to lie. He said I must have made mistakes I didn't remember making. He said I was under stress and maybe I wasn't thinking clearly." She said that last part quietly, the way people say things they've been told so many times they've started to half believe them. Margaret looked up from her notes. "He told you that you weren't thinking clearly." "Multiple times." Over the past year, my daughter wrapped her hands around her mug. "He said I was too sensitive, that I misread situations, that I had a habit of catastrophizing." Margaret wrote something down and did not comment. She didn't need to. We both recognized what we were looking at. That afternoon, I reached out to a woman named Carol Simmons. A mutual contact had put me in touch with Carol 8 months earlier, under circumstances that, at the time, I had filed away and told myself would be relevant eventually. Carol was 41, a commercial property attorney. She had been engaged to Preston Hargrove for 7 months in 2019 before she broke it off. She had never spoken publicly about why. She answered my call on the 3rd ring, and I introduced myself and said, "I know this is unexpected." I said, "My daughter married your former fiancé." I said, "I think you and I may have information that matters to each other." There was a very long pause. Then Carol said, "I have been waiting for someone to call me about this family for 5 years." She drove to my house the following evening. My daughter was upstairs with the children. I met Carol in my study and we sat across from each other and she told me what had happened. She had met Preston Hargrove at a charity function in 2018. He had been charming, intelligent, attentive in the specific way that feels, in the moment, like being truly seen. They moved quickly. He proposed after 6 months. She moved into his townhouse. That was when things began to shift. Small things first. Comments about her friends being too loud, too much, the wrong kind of people for where they were headed. Suggestions that her mother called too often, was too involved, didn't respect their privacy. After 3 months, she had quietly stopped seeing her closest friends. After 5 months, she had started apologizing to him for things she wasn't sure she'd done wrong. The engagement ended when Carol went to visit a college friend for a long weekend against Preston's wishes. She came home to find her belongings moved to the guest room. He told her she had a problem with boundaries and that they needed space. 2 weeks later, he announced through his attorney that the engagement was dissolved and that Carol owed him $12,000 for an engagement ring she had already returned. "I fought it," Carol said. She had a steady, careful way of speaking, like someone who had spent years making sure she couldn't be misquoted. "I hired an attorney. The case went nowhere because his mother's firm had contacts that made it very difficult. But the thing that stayed with me, the thing I couldn't shake, was what happened the week before the breakup. What happened? She reached into her bag and took out her phone, pulled up a video she had clearly watched many times before. She handed it to me. It was a recording from a doorbell camera, the timestamp showing October 2019. Preston Hargrove stood at the front door of an apartment I didn't recognize. He had flowers. He looked exactly like a man who had done something wrong and was genuinely sorry. He rang the bell. A young woman answered. He looked at her with the expression of someone delivering a performance they had rehearsed. "Carol," he said on the video, "I know I hurt you. I've been doing a lot of work on myself. I understand now what I did wrong. Please give me one more chance." The woman on the screen crossed her arms. She listened. She did not look convinced. Preston lowered himself to one knee. Carol fast-forwarded. He left the building. He walked around the corner where the main camera couldn't reach him, but the parking garage camera across the street had caught him. He walked to his car. He took out his phone. He was laughing. I handed the phone back to Carol. "He did this to someone before you." Her jaw was tight. "At least one other woman that I know of. Possibly more." We sat in silence for a moment. "What do you need from me?" she asked. I told her what I needed. She didn't hesitate. The annual Hargrove Realty Group Gala was held every October at the Whitley Hotel in Buckhead, one of the most photographed events on Atlanta's business social calendar. Black tie. 300 guests. Every significant name in Georgia real estate, politics, and finance. My son-in-law's mother had hosted it for 15 years. It was, in every practical sense, her coronation renewed annually. This year, she was scheduled to receive the Georgia Women in Business Lifetime Achievement Award. I RSVP'd for 2. In the 8 days between Margaret's visit and the gala, a number of things happened quietly. The lease agreement between Hargrove Realty Group and Meridian Property Trust contained a clause that permitted the landlord to conduct an emergency audit of tenant compliance in the event of documented financial irregularity. My attorneys filed the audit notice on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Hargrove Realty Group's access to certain internal financial systems was restricted pending review, as required under the lease terms. This was not publicly visible. It looked, from the outside, like an internal administrative matter. On Thursday, my banker called the commercial lender holding Hargrove Realty Group's primary operating line of credit. I had purchased that debt 2 years earlier through a financial instrument so routine it had attracted no attention. I was now the entity to whom that line of credit answered. I instructed a routine credit review to begin, the kind that pauses access to funds until completion. By Friday, my son-in-law's mother could not make her monthly vendor payments. By Saturday, she was on the phone with people she trusted and finding that none of them had answers that satisfied her. I knew this because Marcus, my head of security, had positioned himself appropriately, not illegally, simply observationally. On Sunday, my daughter came into my study while I was reviewing documents. She stood in the doorway for a moment watching me. "Mom." "Yes." "Are you going to destroy them?" I set down the document and looked at her. "No, I'm going to expose them. That's different. Destruction implies I have something against them personally. I don't. What I have is documentation, and I have a building they are about to discover they don't control. And I have a responsibility to make sure what happened to you and Carol doesn't happen to the next woman who crosses paths with Preston Hargrove." My daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's going to say I put you up to this. He can say whatever he likes. The paperwork speaks for itself." She nodded. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how he told me I wasn't thinking clearly, about the apologies. I thought for a long time that I was the problem, that I was too needy, too sensitive, not secure enough for a man like him. You were not the problem. I know that now." She looked at her hands. "I think I've known it for about a year and just been too afraid to say it out loud." I stood and crossed the room and held her for a moment. Then I said, "Get a good night's sleep. We have a gala to attend." The night of the gala, the Whitley was luminous. Valets in white gloves, photographers at the entrance, women in floor-length gowns moving through the lobby with the particular confidence of people who have attended enough of these events to stop being impressed by them. I wore a deep burgundy gown I had worn once before at a state bar dinner 12 years ago. I wore no jewelry except my mother's pearl earrings, which I had worn every significant day of my adult life. My daughter walked beside me in midnight blue. Carol Simmons walked on my other side in a fitted charcoal dress with her hair pulled back, her expression calm and prepared. People I knew greeted me at the door. I smiled and kissed cheeks and said appropriate things about the venue and the occasion. I had attended this gala 4 times previously as a guest. No one had any reason to expect this year would be different. My son-in-law's mother was holding court near the bar when we entered. She was magnificent in a gold gown, her silver hair immaculate, speaking to a circle of people who were laughing at something she had just said. She looked like a woman with nothing on her conscience and nothing to fear. She saw me from across the room. Her smile held, but I watched her eyes recalculate. She had not expected me here. She had not, I suspected, expected anything at all, because she had been operating under the assumption that my daughter would be too humiliated to act and that I would be too polite to respond. She would learn something about polite. Preston was near the stage speaking to a man I didn't recognize. I watched my daughter see her husband across that room. I watched her back straighten. I watched her choose not to look away. That was the moment I understood that my daughter had already decided who she was going to be on the other side of this. I didn't need to be afraid for her anymore. At 8 o'clock, the evening's program began. The room settled into its tables. Speeches about Georgia's business community, about progress and legacy, and the particular pride of building something that lasts. Then the award presentation. My son-in-law's mother walked to the stage to extended applause. She was comfortable at podiums. She thanked the selection committee, thanked her colleagues, thanked her son, who stood from his seat and led another round of applause. She spoke about integrity. She used that word 3 times. She spoke about what it meant to build something with your own hands, with your own vision, in a city as competitive and unforgiving as Atlanta. I texted a single word to my technology consultant, who was sitting in the audio-visual booth at the back of the ballroom, having replaced the regular operator 2 hours earlier, on the basis of a staffing request I had arranged through the hotel's events coordinator. Now, the lights dimmed. A murmur moved through the room. My son-in-law's mother paused mid-sentence. She looked toward the projection screen behind her, which had been displaying the event's standard branding. The screen changed. White text on black. A single line. The truth about the woman who just told you about integrity. The room went quiet. The first image was a lease document. The lease agreement between Hargrove Realty Group and Meridian Property Trust. The agreement she had signed in 2018, the one with her signature on the final page. Next to it, the incorporation documents for Meridian Property Trust. Next to that, the documents linking Meridian Property Trust to me. I own the building. The screen read in simple white letters. I have owned it for 6 years. She pays me rent. She did not know this until this week. The murmuring became voices. Someone at the table behind me said what out loud. The screen advanced. Bank statements from Hargrove Realty Group's operating accounts. Highlighted in yellow, a series of transactions over 14 months. Funds moved from client escrow accounts into a subsidiary account that existed on no public filing. $340,000 that had not belonged to her. To her right, Preston had gone very still. Forensic accounting summary, the screen displayed. Prepared by Barrett & Associates, certified forensic accountants, commissioned by Meridian Property Trust, in conjunction with an ongoing lease audit. Findings confirmed embezzlement. The room was no longer murmuring. It was breaking into open conversation, people standing, phones rising. My son-in-law's mother gripped the podium. She turned to look for someone in the control booth, someone to stop this, someone to cut the presentation. No one cut it. The screen advanced again. A video. Carol's doorbell camera. October 2019. Preston on one knee. Carol, I know I hurt you. I've been doing a lot of work on myself. I understand now what I did wrong. Then a second video beside it. November 2023. The same man. A different porch. A different woman. Diane, I know I hurt you. I've been doing a lot of work on myself. Then a third. March 2025. My daughter's face through a living room window, visible in the background, Preston standing in the front hallway of their home. Sophia, I know I hurt you. 3 videos, 3 women, 3 years, 3 identical scripts. Carol stood from our table. The room noticed. A path opened. She walked to the stage and climbed the stairs and stood 15 feet from Preston Hargrove with her hands loose at her sides and her chin level. My name is Carol Simmons, she said. Her voice carried. 5 years ago I was engaged to this man. She did not gesture at him. She did not need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who she was speaking about. What happened in those 7 months, I believed for a long time, was my fault. I believed I was too demanding, too inflexible. Too much. She paused. I know better now. She described it plainly. The isolation. The financial control. The way he had taken money she could not prove was taken, and then made it her word against his. The way his mother's firm had made it professionally difficult for her to find footing afterward in Atlanta's legal real estate community. She was not dramatic. She was specific. That specificity was more devastating than any raised voice could have been. My daughter walked to the stage. She stood beside Carol. She did not speak yet, just stood there, which was enough. I stood. I walked down the center of the ballroom as the crowd parted without my asking them to. I had been in enough rooms in my life to understand that people make way for someone who is not asking permission. I climbed the stairs. I stood at the podium. I looked at the room. My name is Eleanor Voss. Some of you know me from 20 years of practice as a civil litigation attorney. Some of you know me as the woman who built the Meridian portfolio. All of you should know that the building this company has operated from for the past 6 years is mine. And the lease I am terminating effective, the end of this month, belongs to a firm that has been systematically stealing from its own clients. The documents are already with the Georgia Real Estate Commission, I continued. They are already with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They are already with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. What you are watching on this screen is not a surprise or a performance. It is confirmation of what investigators have already received. I looked at my son-in-law. He was standing beside his chair with his hands at his sides and the particular expression of a man who has just understood that the floor he has been standing on was never as solid as he believed. 3 women sat in this room tonight, I said. 3 women whose lives your pattern ran through. You are not a man who makes mistakes. You are not a man who fell into bad habits. You are a man with a system. The system ends tonight. 2 officers from the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit entered through the side door. I had spoken with their commanding officer 4 days prior. They walked to where my son-in-law's mother was still standing at the podium, and they spoke to her quietly. She did not raise her voice. She understood, in that moment, that the performance was over. My son-in-law was taken aside by a 3rd officer. He tried to speak. The officer was patient and impassive. The ballroom came apart into noise. I did not stay to narrate it. I walked back to Carol and my daughter, and the 3 of us moved toward the exit together, while the room behind us filled with flashing phones and shouted questions and the sound of a very carefully constructed world meeting the moment it had always been moving toward. 3 weeks later, I was in the offices of a woman named Patricia Gates, who ran the largest domestic abuse resource center in Atlanta's metro area. I had met Patricia at a bar association fundraiser 9 years ago. She was the kind of person who made things happen through sheer refusal to accept that they couldn't. I wrote a check that afternoon for $250,000 from the Voss Family Foundation, which I had established 8 years earlier, and which had funded education initiatives and legal aid clinics, and now, this. Patricia held the check and looked at me. This will keep our legal advocacy program running for 3 years. Then it's the minimum, I said. We'll talk about a long-term partnership. My daughter was with me. She had taken over as director of operations at my property management firm 2 weeks earlier, a position that had been waiting for her longer than she knew. She was good at it. She was, I had always believed, capable of more than the life she had been talked into accepting. Carol had opened a practice focusing on real estate fraud litigation. She had 4 clients in her first week. The criminal proceedings were ongoing. I will not pretend that the wheels of justice move quickly, because they do not. But the Georgia Real Estate Commission had suspended Hargrove Realty Group's broker license pending investigation. The building on Peachtree Road had a new tenant under negotiation. And 3 women who had spent years believing, in their quieter moments, that perhaps they had imagined the worst of it, now had documentation that confirmed they had not imagined anything at all. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I drove to Piedmont Park alone. I parked where I had parked 7 weeks earlier and walked across the grass to the fountain. I sat on the bench where I had found my daughter with 4 bags and her children and the specific look of someone who has stopped trusting their own judgment. It was a cool morning. The park was quiet. A few joggers, a man walking a dog, 2 women pushing strollers side by side. I sat for a while without thinking about anything in particular, which is rare for me and which I allowed myself to do because I had earned it. Somewhere behind me I heard a child's voice, high and delighted, calling to a bird. I turned and it was not my grandchildren, but it could have been, and it occurred to me that this is what it is all for. Not the winning. Not the particular satisfaction of watching someone discover that the foundation beneath their empire belongs to you. Those things matter, but they are not the center. The center is a little girl on a Tuesday morning in a park who has no reason to be afraid. I sat on that bench and I let myself feel the full weight of what had almost happened and what hadn't, and then I stood up and walked back to my car. There are women in your life right now who are being told they are not thinking clearly. There are women who have stopped calling their mothers as often as they used to, who have apologized so many times for things they did not do wrong that the apologies have started to feel true. I know because I was shown the signs late, later than I should have been, and I have spent 7 weeks understanding exactly what it cost. I am Eleanor Voss. I built something from nothing in a city that did not always want to make space for me, and I am still building. What I built could not be taken because it was never in only one place. It was in documents and trusts and the kind of patience that comes from having once had nothing and deciding that it will never happen to the people you love. If you are watching this and something in it recognizes itself in your life, please do not wait for someone like me to find you in a park. You do not need to wait to be found. Reach out to a trusted person, an attorney, a counselor, a hotline. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available around the clock. You are not catastrophizing. You are not too sensitive. You are paying attention, and that attention is worth everything. Like this video if it spoke to you. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. This is Jewel Revenge. And we don't just survive. We build.